This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. After months of chaos, censorship, violence, Epstein files, and the untimely deaths of two American citizens at the hands of federal agents, Donald Trump's public approval ratings are at their lowest point ever. And though he's loath to admit it in public, the president and his staff are very much having to make changes to try to stop the loss of support that he's seeing, including from within his own party. Despite Trump's increasing unpopularity and extremism, Democrats in Congress are internally divided on how to respond, with newer members wanting to do almost anything possible to gum up the works, and the leadership wanting to avoid government shutdowns and to not rock the boat too much. There's a rift among the Democratic voter base as well, actually. In a late January poll, Marquette Law School found that 51% of Democrats and people who leaned that way approved of the Democrats in Congress, with 49% disapproving. By contrast, 80% of the Republicans and those who leaned that way in the sample said that they approved of congressional Republicans, with only 20% saying that they disapproved. Democratic voters seem to want the party to go much harder in opposing Trump, but that goes against everything that the Democratic leadership has understood as a possible politics. And that is something that was shaped for them in part by conservative refugees from the Republican Party who have fled the reactionary extremism of Trumpism and not learned anything after leaving. Joining me to discuss all of this is Chris Lehman. He is the DC bureau chief at The Nation magazine, and he is also the former editor of The New Republic, and he is a contributing editor at The Baffler. I hope you'll enjoy it. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, religion, media, and society, and how they all intersect to create our culture. And if you like what we're doing, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/discoverflux. We have free and paid options there. And if you go to flux.community, you can subscribe on Substack as well. And if you can do a paid subscription, that would be really great. I appreciate it very much. It is a tough time to be in media, and I can use your support. There are a lot of other content options out there that don't really need the paid subscription money the way that I do. And so I would appreciate anything you can do in that regard. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button to get notified whenever there's a new episode. All right, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Chris Lehman. Hey, Chris, welcome back to the show.
Very happy to be here, Matt. How are you doing?
Good. Well, good enough, right?
Right.
At the end of the country, there are minor problems.
Yeah, that's always the disclaimer.
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, though, there have been, a number of positive developments recently, and so that's kind of what we're here to talk about. And I think it is beginning. Probably the biggest one is that, it's for a very bad reason, but all of the violence and killing that the Trump regime has been doing against private citizens, the general public has finally started to notice it. It looks like,
Right.
But Trump himself, of course, is saying that he's more popular than ever. But there is not a single poll that says that. And in fact, he also did recently say that he has a silent majority. Like that to me is the biggest tell that that he knows something is wrong with his PR approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is, the situation is a perfect kind of storm of, as you say, they're objectively losing ground with the general public. And particularly, what's been striking is there's the group he's doing worst at is now the biggest group of registered voters, independents. And, we're coming out of the 2024 cycle where everything was about the so-called low information voter being mobilized by MAGA. And that's when you had these surges in support among Hispanic and Black voters that were historic for a Republican candidate. But yeah, that has plummeted very dramatically to earth now, and for instance, Latino voters say they oppose Trump's immigration policy by a 70-30 margin. So that is, there was all of this loose talk after last election day that, we were seeing the lineaments of a new Trump coalition akin to the, coalition that Reagan put together or that Nixon before him. And that was never true. And it's become very clear that, you kind of live by the low information voter and die by the low information voter. And when bad information penetrates, which is, I think, the most important thing out of this hellish period we're living through, they have no answer. They just continually double down. It's been, quite striking throughout all, especially the murderous siege of Minneapolis. There's a very standard presidential playbook for something like this is, you sort of offer up whoever, Kirsty Gnome's head on a pike. You sort of acknowledge, okay, we
You
got
feel
a
their
little,
pain. Yeah.
yeah, we got a little carried away. And, now we're going to do, kinder, gentler, murderous sieges, which, sadly the Democratic Party would go for and, they've already, what's, you can always count on me to bring the cloud in any silver lining situation. But, things that, Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate said they were going to go to the mat for and close down the government over were things like, having ICE and CPB agents, CBP rather agents, where cameras.
Yeah.
The administration has unilaterally done that anyway, and because among other things, this is the kind of criminal gangster administration that, they're anytime footage from one of these cams is going to be sought in a legal proceeding, they'll say, "Oh, we lost it; it was destroyed." Whatever. It's not going to change anything fundamental about the mass deportation program that is now spilling over into assaults on dissenting U.S. citizens. So yeah,
Yeah.
the administration has created all the conditions that have sunk its standing in the polls, and they're just going to keep doing it. There is,
Because they don't know anything else. I mean, that's the thing.
they don't know anything else,
Yeah,
right?
like
And
the
once,
Republican right's sole PR strategy for the past 80 years has been, well, we just have to be more right wing,
right,
and then it'll
so,
work.
yeah, which it has succeeded in getting them power, and largely because of the failure of the Democrats to be an effective opposition party throughout this whole long stretch of time you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are now at this point where, I think ordinary voters who aren't that, certainly not ideologically driven and not, that informed about everything the Trump administration has been doing, you see um, the murders of Renee Good and Andrew Prince in Minneapolis, and I think just as powerfully you see the deportation of Liam, the 5-year-old, in the bunny hat. Like there's nothing the right can do to make that seem defensible or palatable. It just, I think, triggers this deep human revulsion that I'm glad that American voters are experiencing, because I was starting to have my doubts for a while there. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, there's a significant disadvantage that the American left has in that the far right Republican agenda is so monstrous that when you
right,
tell people what it is,
Yeah.
if they're not informed, they don't believe you that it's
They
real.
won't believe you, right?
It's
Right.
unbelievable. And in fact, like people have done that in focus groups. They'll say, okay, well, so here is Donald Trump's policy of X. And the
Right.
voters are like, no, that he doesn't believe
Yeah, that can't be right. Yeah, no,
that.
it does militate against, and that is the political challenge for, the opposition is, to present it in these very stark ways and to, yeah, to have enough of a coalition behind you. And that's what, that's the other thing that's happening right now is I think, the citizens of Minneapolis who are, being really heroic and standing up to this siege are, forcing the leaders of the Democratic Party to pay more attention. And it is striking, there was this long, in my view, extremely stupid interval where Matt Iglesias and the sort of popularist types of consultants and writers aligned with the Democrats were saying, we just can't talk about immigration. It's Trump's greatest strength. We don't have a good answer except, we also want to, crack down on illegal crossings and heighten border control, but we want to do it in a more, notionally balanced procedural way. And that again, it's that old, I always go back to there's an old Onion headline where that was like, I think a representation of a Jimmy Carter Reagan debate. And Jimmy Carter is saying something like, let's be reasonable and broker, accords across the world, whatever. And Reagan's line is "Let's kill the bastards," and obviously the Reagan/Trump position is morally abhorrent, but it's very clear and decisive, and it makes a very clear point. And if you're just kind of sitting on your hands the way that Matt Iglesias and also this new think tank, the Searchlight Institute, that promulgated this again stupid memo saying we can't have Democrats saying abolish ICE. They have to say reform ICE or better training, which is especially insane because the shooter who murdered Renee Good was a firearms instructor.
Yeah.
This
The
is not
training is definitely a
yeah,
problem, but it's far from it's not the main problem.
right, and it's not going to solve anything. You have this is all under the watch of Stephen Miller, who is a fascist, sadist, authoritarian goon. Like, and it's garbage in, garbage out. That is what you're going to get as long as he is the de facto, sort of czar of immigration policy in this country. And so you have, I know Democrats don't like politics; they think they're above politics. We were talking earlier about, the sort of scourge of credentialed knowledge elites atop the Democratic Party. And that is the main symptom of it, in my view. They think because they have fancy degrees and they've, waded through the pertinent policy papers and consultant, memos, that they don't have to bother persuading people. They have a sort of quasi divine right based on being part of the knowledge elite to just administer policy. And in something like immigration, where you absolutely need a forceful moral position that sort of addresses everything about the Republican policy on immigration is a lie. That's not hyperbole on my part. Trump has for a decade now fallaciously claimed that there's an out of control immigrant violent crime wave.
Invasion, as he
Right,
said.
an invasion. And if you look at any statistics from again the past century really of immigration, um, immigrants commit violent crime at a significantly lower rate than the native born population. And all you have to do is think about their situation to understand, like, yeah, you're not going to want to draw attention to yourself by committing a violent crime if you're not in the country legally and you might be deported. Like, it's just, it makes zero sense.
Well, and the
Trump also,
stats show that too. The
right, the
actual
stats
stats.
absolutely show that up and down. Democrats don't effectively
And
make
also, they don't draw on welfare
egg,
because
or you're
they're not
stating my next
eligible for it.
point.
So they're
Yes,
literally
actually,
they
there
are
it's
paying into the
right.
economy and taking almost nothing out. That is
It
what's
is
happening.
the polar opposite of what the Republicans claim.
Yeah,
You're absolutely right. They pay into Social Security and Medicare
local
and
and
welfare,
taxes.
and they
Yeah,
get nothing back. So it's a net positive. This in 2024, the um, um, I'm forgetting the agency, but the major federal agency that tracks these things estimated the contribution of immigrant workers over the next decade at $10 trillion. So, like, if you just connect the dots here, and this is what I say when I'm in arguments with MAGA types, is like, what invading force gives you $10 trillion? Like, sorry, you have to, find better words, to describe whatever it is you're hallucinating. Um, and on and on, and people even forget the reason for this heinous mobilization in Minneapolis is ostensibly because of rampant welfare fraud on the part of Somali daycare centers, and which has all been promulgated by a right-wing YouTuber and has been demonstrated to be total BS at the level he's claiming. There
and
was
yeah,
a
and
little bit
also
of,
seems to be remarkably stupid, low
yeah,
IQ person.
yeah, no, that is all true and taken as read, but and and again, just at the basic level of operational sense making, right? Who mobilizes a paramilitary force to combat welfare fraud? Like, you, the if it's real, you get accountants. Like, none of this has anything to do with reality, and yet you know you go back to when Abrego Garcia here in Maryland was wrongfully detained, and the president of El Salvador said it openly. Everyone in the justice said it openly. Chris Van Hollen, my senator, who I'm very proud of on this issue, went to visit him at CCOD and made this an issue. And reportedly, Leonard Jeffries said, don't do this. Again, it's this whole idea, we can't touch this issue. It's Donald Trump's sacred source of popularity. And you know, um, that moment when Van Hollen sort of said no, this is just wrong, and I'm going to make it clear. I think that is when the Democrats were finally forced into a position of like, okay, we can't just pretend indefensible things can be wished away.
Yeah, or get
And
away with just responding with angry press conference.
yeah,
And
right. An angry letter, like that's going
yeah,
to do anything. So yeah, and it all, and again, going further back in sort of the history, and this is all stuff very well from coming up on the right, but I often think have been thinking whenever it is I would come across Jeffries or Schumer or some other Democratic leader saying, or Matt Iglesias saying, like, we have to just shut up about immigration. It's Donald Trump's strongest issue. Think back to the 2004 election cycle, which very well, right? So, John, the Democrats in their infinite wisdom decided we're going to nominate John Kerry because he's, this strong military leader. It's the best way to go after the militarist Iraq invading Bush administration. Um, And what did the Republicans do? They did not say, oh, you know, John Kerry's military record is so much superior to George W. Bush's. We're just going to sit on our hands and hope this whole thing goes away. No, they invented the Swift boat calumny, where
Yep.
they got these kind of people under Kerry's command who are high on the right wing supply to sort of confabulate all these things about Kerry's record in Vietnam that weren't true, and they made a big show at the convention of wearing band-aids. I can't even remember what that whole I'm sure you do, but the larger point is like, and by the way, the architect of that whole strategy was Chris, what's his name, the
Oh,
co-chair of the,
Rufo?
no
Not
no
Rufo.
no the co-chair of Trump's 2024 campaign. But my point,
Anyway,
yeah, my
yeah.
point is, that is the kind of raw street fighting mentality that the right has been bringing to electoral politics over the past, all of my political lifetime and well before that. And the
Yeah.
Democrats again are in that Jimmy Carter position of like, well, let's do nice things for nice professional people. It's just not. It doesn't work as politics.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that, this mentality it comes from something that we have talked about a little bit on the show last night we were on, and as I recall, the idea of who makes up politics. And
Right.
on the Republican side, they are, in terms of the workers in the Republican industry, if you will. Um,
Right.
it's a broad, obviously they're funded overwhelmingly by billionaire oligarchs, but in terms of the people who actually pull the levers and stamp the papers and make the spam,
Yeah.
they come from all over the place. Like some of them were like me, former
Yeah.
trailer park kids, and some like you, a high school dropout, like that's who's running a lot of these Republicans, and especially in the Trump era, when basically Trump said to the existing Republican campaign professionals, get the hell out.
Yeah. Take a hike.
And so the doors were opened for anyone who supported him, essentially. And
Right. And they have adapted well to this new media environment in a way that, again, as you have observed over and over again, the Democrats have not, and they just don't have an effective. They have, again, this anti-politics model of politics that if we just fine tune the wording of the message in such a way, per our consultants and per our focus groups, we will get the marginal outcomes we need, and X number of purple districts or whatever.
well, it's
And
also that they think people decide on issues.
right, which is, and again, that is the class blind spot, right? That is like,
Yeah.
I think in terms of policy, I know the you know uh, kind of optimal policy solution for issue X, and I just have to tell voters, and they will fall in line.
The other thing that is so frustrating is, so they've got this idea, well, we just have to be in the center because that's where most of the voters are. Well, informed centrism does not exist. It's
No,
not real. No one
no,
is who actually knows about politics is like, oh, I'm going to take my position exactly in between the parties. No one does that. Okay.
right.
Only people who are low information and don't pay attention. But the other thing is, if that viewpoint were true, then Republicans would never win elections.
Right,
Like,
right.
this is
No,
a party that keeps getting more and more extreme every
I
single
know, right.
cycle, and so that alone should disabuse Democratic elites of this cautionary nonsense, because it isn't actually data driven. Like these guys
Right,
they've constructed a mirage of data, and they're chasing after it like Don Quixote and his windmills. That's what they're doing.
no, No, it's absolutely true, and it is, it's all, harks back to, the kind of Democratic Leadership Council, New Democrat model inaugurated in the Clinton years, and that was, after the crushing defeat of Walter Mondale in 1984, Democratic elites decided, you know, two things. One is like we need to re-engineer the entire Democratic Party so that we can retake the White House. And sort of the other thing is a subsidiary premise of that. We have to discard the existing activist base of the party. We have to be the kind of, culturally moderate, pro-business, knowledge elite. This is the whole, that literally the term yuppie derives from Gary Hart's 1984 presidential campaign, where initially, pundits first tried to call this new style of knowledge driven Democrat the Atari Democrat, and that didn't really take because I don't think anyone really knew much about tech or tech brands back then. And then someone hit upon the term young urban professional, and that was Gary Hart's kind of calling card in electoral terms, and no one bothered to notice that Gary Hart didn't win, or that Michael Dukakis, who adopted exactly the same model, he was going to be the candidate of quote competence, who presided over the tech miracle of Route 128 outside of Boston, and he was going to be again this managerial guy who was going to be reasonable on the cultural issues that had divided the country over the 60s and beyond, but be this kind of stable managerial guy. And then finally Clinton hit on the sort of combination of traits that worked, and it largely just stemmed from triangulation, which is Dick Morris's contribution to the lexicon, which is to say you take the issues that Republicans that belong to them and sort of soften the edges and find, again, as you were saying, this sort of mythic center point to sell a pro-business agenda. And what actually happened over that long recourse or recess, I should say, presidential campaigns is that, the Democratic Party kicked its working class base to the curb. The main legacy of Clinton in economic terms was NAFTA and GATT and the whole globalization agenda, which, a generation hence is the fodder for Donald Trump's success. He ran against most successfully in 2016, the real harm that globalization had done to the manufacturing centers of the country, and he didn't deliver anything as a result. But he was the first candidate to sort of say, because globalization is very much the oligarchs, kind of sweet spot, and Democrats supported it, Republicans supported it. It was Trump's sort of genius at that time to realize, like, yeah, actual voters feel really neglected and condescended to and harmed by these policies. So I'm going to rhetorically speak to them and continue to govern as an oligarch.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is also that, and this is another kind of inherent disadvantage, that a party that is not trying to destroy everything,
Right.
is that failure is actually good for Trump in some way, because the worse things get, the more he can blame, because his entire campaign approach and entire messaging approach is those other people did this to you. They're
Yep.
hurting you. And so
Right.
the worse he makes things, the worse he makes the economy, the worse he makes education, the worse he makes healthcare, the worse he makes inflation. and jobs, whatever it is,
Right.
he
You
can
can just
always say,
say,
no, they did it. They're the
right.
ones that are doing this. I'm
Even
I'm
though,
standing up for
right,
you.
right. I am your retribution, famously, right?
Yeah.
And he can do that even in conditions like now where Republicans, have a trifecta. And of course, the Supreme Court backing them up. So, yeah, it is. And, it all goes long ago. Henry Adams said, politics is the organization of hatreds. And Kevin Phillips, Nixon's famous, sort of campaign guru who helps engineer the Southern strategy, took that up as his mantra. And, that has been the story on the right, certainly ever since. And the Democrats, again, even in this unbelievably target rich environment, I mean, if Stephen Miller were a Marvel villain, he would not be believable. you know?
Yeah.
And and that's just for starters. I mean, you have JD Vance, who's just an obvious, um, you know, I would say empty soup, but he's full of internet lies, and he's a complete, he will
He's a
say
4chan
any.
zombie, basically.
Right, exactly, exactly. That's a very good way of putting it. And Christine Ohm, all of these, there is not a single, I guess, maybe the interior guy is. I just don't think he's gotten in enough trouble yet. But there's not a, and it's all deliberately engineered this way. Pete Hegseth, all these people are just um, MAGA, militant. I was about to curse, but
Oh, you
you
can do
know,
it. Yeah, we.
oh, okay, that's right. I'm so used to being on the radio, I always catch myself. Um, yeah, but they're just goons, I guess is the best term, and you can go after all of them. And somehow the Democrats, they don't have any sort of unified theory of what's happening right now. They don't, you know, it is, been very cynical for a very long time, and I'm just kind of at a loss. At this is the most advantageous set of, just leaving aside the horrific tragedy of it all, and the massive corruption and abuse of power, and shredding of the Constitution and the rest of it. Like, um, you have all sorts of ways to organize hatreds is my point. And you need to do it. That is, it's an ugly business. I'm not saying, it's good for the soul or anything like that, but you need to go hammer and tongs after these people, and make the message that, if you're feeling scared, to be on the street in your city, if you care about a 5-year-old boy who's been scooped up by this Gestapo operation, these are the people who are doing it to you. And that's how you flip, the Trump reflex, which you're right. He is really good at always saying, like, it isn't me, it's, enemy X. And again,
Yeah.
and even outside the White House, like Elon Musk is, already a vastly hated figure. He's the most important donor on the Republican Party. Like, yeah. I'm just, when, in the course of my day job where I'm covering this, I'm just like,
Well, I think.
how
Well,
have the
yeah.
Democrats made this so hard?
Yeah. Well, okay. So, well, I would say if we go back, just to so we talked about who comprises the Republican political class, but
Yeah.
the Democratic political class is overwhelmingly wealthy, overwhelmingly prep school kids, overwhelmingly Ivy League educated. And so these are people who never experienced hardship. These are people who
Right.
don't have, raucous debates in their own families or communities. They don't know how to do politics because their
Right.
entire, in their worlds where they came from, politics is bad. Having
Right.
arguments, having
Right.
disputes is a
Right.
bad thing. Like, let's just sit down and be the adult in the room. Like, that's and it works
Mhm.
for that world. Like,
Oh, no,
if
right.
but this is not how the political world is, and especially in the age of Trump, you have to change things up. But it's so difficult because they don't ever hire anybody who's new. I mean, like, you look at the list. I mean, hell, we got James Carville. They're still taking advice from this guy who hasn't won an
Oh,
election
yeah, yeah.
since
He ran
1996.
one successful campaign. He then went global, and he was advising like Israeli prime minister candidates who lost. He advised people in,
Yeah.
he's just, yeah, it's dumbfounding, and it's only the reason James Carville has a platform, right? Is he can cosplay as, I'm in touch with the working people. I have a Southern accent, even though he lives in a mansion and he married a Republican political consultant. It's all bullshit.
It
But
is.
yeah, that he is like their spirit animal who can sort of,
He,
say that, oh, back in 1992, we, got all these, Southern racists to fall in line behind Bill Clinton. And I have this, mystic wisdom that no one else does. It is, yeah. And that's another thing, again, in covering Congress, you see, that you saw this long march, the, the reason that, literally at this point, I think the reason that Republicans still have a majority in the House is that so many Democrats have died in the 119th Congress, to sustain their margin. So the you know on the other side of the coin, the Republican caucus has a three term limit for anyone who's chairman of a committee. Like, three strikes, you're out. There are some loopholes to potentially extend it, but that's the model. That was Gingrich's innovation, and it was smart. Because you have on the Democratic side all these people who are just, again, like almost literal zombies, like Dianne Feinstein at the end of her term, and the all the
Dick Durbin is another one
Dick
I would say.
Durbin, yeah,
Um,
and Jerry Conley, who got the gavel over AOC on the oversight committee and then died. And again, that's another feature of it's. I had this insight. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but I was writing about the DNC and David Hogg's fight, to sort of run younger candidates, and that predictably ended badly for him. And I was, sort of reviewing all of this, and it suddenly dawned on me, like, the Democratic National Committee is run like a university. And that's so what it should not be. I think it all had to do, like, Hogg was forced out because there was a legitimate question at the bottom of this. There was a procedural question that a female candidate didn't get a proper hearing for Hogg's vice chair position and all that. But it became this recursive, like, and I know it well from having dropped out of grad school. This is the kind of all language and posturing brand of politics that drives me insane. And predictably, everything about David Hogg's substantive platform has been memory hold now, right? The DNC is just running on autopilot, and
well, and it's disastrous. I mean, they've got
no,
almost
it's
nothing in
disastrous, and
debate.
they've alienated two major union leaders, which again goes back to the whole PMC, distortion of the Democrats. If you're serious about making this party an effective answer to right wing pseudo populism, you need left wing economic populism. It is that simple. But that is a big problem because you have the donors, you have the sort of credentialed elites in political leadership and in this consultant class, the Democratic Party does need to be remade from the ground up. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure how
Yeah.
it happens.
I think,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely. And one of the other big problems also is that the American left institutions, such as they are, they have opened their doors to lots of conservatives, like
yeah.
David Brooks, who you recently wrote about, and but Barry Weiss, and Sam Harris, and like all these people, but they call themselves centrist, and and
It's
here's
the
what's even
magic
more
word.
tragic. Yeah, I mean, here's what's even more tragic, though, is that there are people who are progressives who don't like them, but instead of saying, no, these guys are conservatives, they're calling them reactionary centrists.
Right.
I'm like, please
Yeah.
don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
They're not on our side. They are like, I know because I
Right.
was on the right and I consider myself like them. I said I was a
Right.
conservative, a liberal conservative. That's what these people are. They're not centrists. There's no such thing as informed centrism. So please stop calling these people centrists.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is funny. Like I remember way back when David Brooks was just starting to break, when the Bobo's book was published, I was on some panel that he was also on. And, I obviously didn't have any sense of the menace he would subsequently become. So, we all went collegially out for drinks after the panel. And, he asked me about like my background. At the time I was working at Newsday, but I had come before. Weirdly, I was hired away um, from In These Times, a socialist magazine in Chicago. And Brooks got this very sort of sober look, and he said, well, I generally don't credit the right wing, media bias claim, but I can't imagine um, someone from, say, the National Review getting hired at Newsday. And I was just like, dude, you came from the Washington Times. You came from like literally a Mooney funded hard right, published Sam Francis, all these like raging racists.
Yeah.
And you're going to say like, I'm beyond the pale. So
Yeah,
ever since
Wesley Pruden. Yeah, they're
then,
it was
right.
out and out Confederate.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So like we from that point on we never got along. Let's just and the thing
yeah,
is like,
but
I be again like you, I actually really relish robust political debate at Newsday. These are things that I probably, in retrospect, again, didn't see any of this coming, but I published Tucker Carlson, I published Ann Coulter, like all of these people who I now acknowledge are monsters. But this was the 90s, and they were, Tucker was a quasi libertarian back then. Ann Coulter was insane. I grant you. So, I didn't have a good excuse at that moment. But the point is, like, I was supposed to be this like automaton of the left, right? Who was going to like, I don't know, publish Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky over and over again. And A, that's boring, and B, like, come on. Whatever else you want to say about my beliefs, like I'm a good editor. Like, and that's what the job was. Anyway, I don't mean to harp so much on how thoroughly I find David Brooks, but
well, yeah, no, but I mean, the people like him though. They are just suffused all over publications that
yeah.
present themselves to the public as liberal.
No, that is,
And
I mean, that's
you know,
that's the what the reasonable conservative shtick,
yeah.
right?
What is? And
And
look, and I think we need people like that, but they
oh,
should be over
absolutely.
in the right wing media, not in our media.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Or yeah, or
uh,
I get along with the bulwark people just fine. I
mhm.
think they I don't know. I don't know how they would characterize. I mean, they're never Trumpers, but I don't
I
know.
think some of them have moved further left than others, but
No, it's striking that Bill Kristol. I often observe that Bill Kristol. This makes me feel all kinds of uncomfortable, but he is much better on strategy than the Democratic Party's leadership. Like, he is definitely for going hammer and tongs after ICE. And he's and again because he knows politics, right?
well, it's
So
yeah, it's that, but it's also that when I think about it, that and again, having been born and raised as a Mormon fundamentalist, so much of what drives pretty much every right wing elite, even without religion, the non religious ones, is they hate modernity. They
oh yeah,
hate it. And they hate, they hate international institutions. They hate
right.
successful government. They hate any
Science,
kind of
right,
order of democratic system. They want
right,
everything to be done through the private sector in terms of like forcing social welfare to be done through religious organizations
right,
or and then letting businesses have complete untrammeled ability to destroy countries or exploit citizens. So no minimum wage. Like this is so they all want this,
right,
and the order that was built up through centuries, or let's say a century of effort. The people,
mhm,
once it was made, the people who ran it had no idea why it was good
right,
or how it could be better. And so but then at the same time, you had this movement that started roughly around, during FDR's time in the U.S. That had was like, no, this is all evil. This is terrible. This is satanic. This is socialist. We're going to destroy everything. And the center left elite, they just they're that that's not serious. They don't really believe that. it's
you're right.
all it's all nonsense. Like we don't have to pay attention to Alex Jones. We don't have to pay attention to Donald Trump in
No, no,
2015.
or yeah, no. That there was this moment. These are people have been. I feel like I've been tilted against my whole adult life, but like when Richard Hofstadter and Daniel Bell, sort of came forward to declare, in this confident Cold War, liberal moment that ideology was a dead letter, that what um, the real recrudescent strain of nativism and bigotry in American politics was populism, which was embodied by, at the time, Joe McCarthy. And once McCarthy had been defeated, all of these, Cold War liberal intellectuals, took
The
an
fever will
extended.
break. That's been their
Right,
mantra.
right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, Arthur Schlesinger wrote a terrible book called The Vital Center, in which he endorses a lot of McCarthyism ideas. He's came out in support of loyalty oaths, which is kind of like the Cold War version of like, let's not say anything about immigration, right? Like we'll be able to posture as heroic anti-commie patriots, and push everyone to the left out of the picture. So that that whole dispensation, the kind of Hofstadterian, I guess you would say, idea that liberalism is just, and Louis Hartz famously wrote a book that argued there is no conservative intellectual tradition in America. It has always been liberal. It will always be liberal. And it is stunning to go back and read that body of work now, because it is just so clearly delusional. And all of these
Yeah.
things were still happening. You had the virtue movement, which was getting a lot of momentum at the time. You had the sort of nascent Sunbelt conservative movement that would ripen into the Goldwater campaign, and after that, the Reagan campaign. And yeah, confident, complacent liberals just kept saying, oh, that's a maladaptive strain. It's not going to, overtake America's rational body politic. And that's why
Yeah.
we still don't have the weapons to fight it, because, no one ever took it seriously. Um,
No, they didn't. So one of the other things, though, is that liberalism, early liberalism, did have to argue for itself, and it developed the chops to do it and to make the case and to have the interest and the passion to talk to the public.
yeah,
But the only time that liberalism since then has engaged directly with fascism and authoritarianism is militarily, really, in
right,
this country or in the Anglophone world. And
right, right.
and so they have no muscles memory to fall back onto, that this is what we did last time, and then this is why it worked, or this is why it didn't work. There's
Right,
nothing there, I think.
right, right. And, FDR was very good at messaging around this issue. He depicted our entry into World War II as a battle between slavery and freedom. And it's very, very stark. And it is striking. A while ago, I rewatched, just passingly on cable, part of The Best Years of Our Lives, this 1948 movie about the demobilization of World War II veterans into American post-war society. And there's this scene where one of the soldiers, who can't find a better job, is working as a soda jerk in a drugstore chain. And this guy comes in who's a fascist, who finds out he fought in the war, and he says something like, "Well, it's too bad you were on the wrong side." And Dana Andrews, the actor who plays this character, just punches the living daylights out of this guy. It was just like, it wasn't that shocking, I don't think, to viewers at the time, because that message had penetrated. Like, fascists are bad. They are, anti-American. They're not patriots, and you know this guy happened to be defaming a veteran, so he got what for. But it is striking that coming out of World War II, that message was unambiguous, right? And after the sort of long caesura of the post Cold War era, we've, as you say, we've lost the language, we've lost the ability to effectively conceptualize, and instead we've had this tedious, in my view, debate among liberals and leftists about when is it right to call Trumpism fascist, and clearly that moment has come and gone. I don't think anyone can look at the events in Minneapolis and say, like, this is not the behavior of a fascist regime. To say nothing of arresting Don Lemon like that. I'm a career journalist. I've worked in this industry for so long, and the deafening silence around the arrest of 3 African American journalists in Minneapolis for the simple crime of doing their jobs. That scares me as much as anything else. Like, our media industry has long been corrupted by money and intellectual inertia and decline. But when you are unable to see that moment for what it is, we are in serious trouble.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that, I think, also, so the left lost the ability to argue, to make the case, but also conservatives, I think, also, they, through generational attrition, they, because the conservative Americans, during World War II and afterward, they had the personal knowledge that fascism is not conservatism also.
Right.
And that, and so that's why when people like William F. Buckley and his ilk came along, people were disgusted by it. It was appalling. And Barry Goldwater, had that massive blowout.
Yeah.
loss in 1964. And so people had, because they knew, as you were saying, they had the memory. Well, this is what fascism gets you. It
Right.
gets you, disaster, death, and chaos.
Yeah.
And they knew it because they had seen it with their own eyes.
Yeah.
They had
Right.
lived that memory, and now their grandchildren and great
Right.
grandchildren, they have no knowledge of any of those things. And so conservatives now are, they're starting to think, oh well, maybe we should ally with these fascists because, gosh, if we don't, then my belief that I shouldn't have to pay any taxes, or my belief that
Right.
that children should be forced to read my religious views, like that won't be the law of the land, and that would be awful if I couldn't make people live that
Right.
way, and so they don't have a commitment to democracy, and that's the unfortunate thing. When you look at and the cognitive psychology on this is absolutely unanimous that
Right.
people who are conservative politically, they come to that way of belief through their psychological orientation and their cognitive style. It isn't because of the issues. It's not because of the
Right.
arguments. It is simply, I like simple ideas,
Yeah.
and as Roger Scruton called them, the unthinking people, and he said that they were great,
Oh
that
yeah.
they weren't necessary for society, and like that's who elected Donald Trump. These were not people.
Right.
Overwhelmingly, the people that the demographics that flipped for Trump in 2024 to 2020 were younger people who
Yeah.
had no memory of his first term and no idea what had happened
What
and
was
how
laying in
awful it
wait.
had been.
Right. Right. No, and it's yeah, it's also just true that this you know cohort of people, the people who don't think, um, if they're not giving, I mean, you can say the anti-fascist impulse was also an unthinking reflex at the time. So if you're not given a strong sense of what's at stake, and this has been my frustration with another frustration with the Democratic Party is you've had these successive presidential campaigns that have run on what is objectively the case that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement are a mortal threat to our democracy. But the sad truth is that most, especially younger people, have no meaningful experience of living in a democracy, right? They certainly don't have it when it comes to organizing their working lives. It's become an incredibly adverse environment for union organization, even though there is a lot of really powerful organizing going on. And they don't have any sense of democracy as something that is meaningful in a atmosphere of sort of total civic corruption. If democracy means anything, it means powerful people are held to the same legal, moral, ethical standards as the rest of us, and that has not been the case for a very, very long time. And the Epstein files are such an object demonstration of that, right? And it's very interesting. It's all very close to a confirmation of QAnon. There is a global pedophilic conspiracy, but guess what? A lot of your team is part of it, and that's why there's been there was this great righteous QAnon slash MAGA push to get the Epstein files released. And even now, with them heavily redacted, and I'm convinced like the most damaging Trump stuff is still being held in reserve. But there's still enough there that yeah, people are going quiet about it who were like this was so central to their identities, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
and it's Well, and these people, I mean, in the files, I mean, this with the sole exception of Noam Chomsky, who has
Right.
always been morally problematic, in my view. Overwhelmingly, this was people who were the conservative Democrats and Republicans. That's
Yep.
it. Like there aren't any other leftist people in these Epstein files, as far as I've seen.
No, no.
And
So yeah, that's the thing. Is like it's like the reverse photographic negative of QAnon. Right?
yeah, well, it's like QAnon was invented and promulgated as a defense mechanism, basically,
Right. Right. Which
almost.
is, yeah.
Uh, and because, and I don't know, but it's also that when you're reading these files, and one thing that struck me was these conversations that Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein were having, and and they were both. I mean, and what it shows very clearly is that Epstein was very friendly toward Trump and solicitous for him and concerned that he would
Oh,
win.
sure. Right.
And so when he was talking with Thiel, one of the things he said was that Epstein said, "Well, Brexit is just the beginning,"
Right.
and Thiel was like, "A beginning of what?"
What?
And
Right. Right.
Epstein then proceeded to quote back Peter Thiel to himself,
Right.
essentially,
Right.
the beginning of tribalism, the destruction of the old institutions, so that
Yep.
basically, I mean, this is this is supervillain stuff, Chris. That's
No,
really what this
that's what
is.
I'm saying. Right. Right.
People wouldn't believe that it was real if you wrote it as even as nonfiction,
Right.
and that is the thing, that as a reporter who's reported on extremism for a long time, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, that
Yeah. Yeah.
when you tell people, this is what these guys are doing, this is their agenda, they don't believe you. They
No.
don't
No.
believe you.
When shortly after I started at the Nation, I wrote a cover story on QAnon. Circa whatever 2022, coming out of the pandemic. And I did a couple of radio interviews where, or podcasts where people flat out refused, when I would trot out, the basic stats at that point, which is that more than 30% of Americans endorse some version of the QAnon, fantasy. And people just flat out said to me, like, that can't be right. I'm just like, I'm not making this up. Which is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that really is kind of the cardinal or the original sin of American, broader left, is they don't take the far right seriously enough, and you see it also, in terms of like when you turn on MS Now, as it's called, it's always the same people on the shows. Like,
Yeah.
you don't hear any new speakers, you don't hear any new thoughts, new strategies. No, it's like, let's hear what these people already told you for the 100th time.
Right. And their version of sort of viewpoint diversity is like Joe Scarborough and Nicole Wallace, who I sort of knew them both when they were actual Republicans, and they weren't interesting people then. Like, that's
Mhm.
yeah, it is this. I mean, and obviously Fox News does the same thing, but they've got this more. No one is under any illusion that they're presenting a balanced picture of anything. I think they've even retired the fair and balanced slogan at this point.
They
So,
did, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, but then we have also on the other side that, on the further left, that I think that there's just a lot of nihilism, and like I used to
right.
do some work with the Young Turks, like that channel is just nihilist. Everyone on there is a nihilist,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
monetize nihilism and thinking, oh well, what if we teamed up with Tucker Carlson, to go after the government? And it's like, Tucker Carlson hates capitalism because he's a feudalist.
right, right.
That
Talk
is
about
not your
your revolt
ally.
against modernity, right?
Yeah, that is not your ally under any circumstance. Now, and it is true, but it is true on the other hand that, the people who are his audience a lot of them, have potential to be converted, or at least to stay home and stop, listening to these assholes, because they're not listening to them because they're presenting ideas. Like
Right.
right this week as we're chatting, um, Christopher Rufo, the right wing activist, it was complaining about how all the most read
Norwegian.
Substacks are left wing, and so therefore Substack has a left wing bias. And it's like, no, your side doesn't read. um, you guys don't like to read. You like to,
Yeah.
listen to a guy in a chair talk for 3 hours to tell you what to think about everything.
Right.
That's
Right.
what your model is. You don't want to read a concise essay. You don't want to read an academic paper. You don't want to read a well-researched magazine cover story.
Right.
You don't want that. Your audience doesn't want that, and they never have.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Uh,
yeah, it's funny. I just reviewed this new Tucker biography by Jason Zengerle. And again, it's striking, just like, and again, I knew Tucker in the before times, and he's just an uninteresting person. And he figured out, the the real pivot point in his career wasn't an ideological conversion moment. It wasn't like he suddenly decided Pat Buchanan and Sam Francis or whoever are my new, idols. He decided he wanted to be on TV. That was it. And people forget all this, but he was on Dancing with the Stars. He auditioned to be a host of a NBC game show and didn't get it. And
he was an MSNBC host also.
he was also an MSNBC host, yeah, and that flatlined. And when he came to Fox, Roger Ailes openly professed hatred for him. Again, I think in sort of class terms, he's just obnoxious, preppy asshole. And Roger was a son of a hardware store owner in Ohio, um, and so Tucker would get these sort of gigs where he was like a stunt weekend anchor. He would like play cowbell for Blue Oyster Cult and do stupid. It's the same sort of idiocy that Pete Hegseth used to do when he was a weekend
Yeah.
host. So
Before he was our defense secretary.
yeah, right. Um, and before Tucker Carlson was a kingmaker, who's now being speculated about as Donald Trump's successor. And it was only because Trump got elected, and Bill O'Reilly succumbed to his massive sex pest scandal, that Tucker got the primetime spot on Fox. So
Yeah.
it's less sort of the origin story of a right-wing supervillain than what makes Sammy run, in my view. Like he figured out how do I stay famous, and this is his ticket.
Yeah. Well, and that there's got to be something in between just letting any schlub have a job and only letting people who worked for Bill Clinton 30 years ago have a job. Like there's got to be
Yeah.
somewhere in between. I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think for that to happen, again, it's like with the Democratic Party. You need to, and it's like the commercial model of mainstream media, especially television, is flatlining right now. So people do have to approach it from a fundamentally different standpoint. But it's the same problem. You have entrenched money. You have entrenched, sort of a professional caste above it all.
The other thing also, besides having a more oppositional left and that is really willing to go to the mat, left, there also has to be a more open and hopeful left. And that actually was something that was different about the 2008 Barack Obama campaign. And people didn't learn that lesson. And I would tie it back to in this post-war consensus that existed also, that
Right.
when we look at authors like Hannah Arendt or Eric Fromm, like they talked very well about the and at length in several, like a lot of books, about the real psychological origins of fascism,
Right.
and it is an ideology of despair. It is an ideology of loss, of
Right.
death, and you can't you cannot defeat that unless you offer the opposite of that to
Right, right.
people.
Which again, like I think FDR was really a great model for that.
He was, yeah.
A kind of messaging that was sort of, formally encapsulated in like the fireside chats where, he and this was like the most patrician person on the planet, basically. I think his mother um, moved with him to Harvard for his freshman year. Like, but he was able to sort of tap into this sort of wellspring of a shared national identity, a shared national purpose that was expansive and was targeted at coming out of the depression, the forgotten man, the
Yeah,
need.
uplifting. Yeah.
Right, and the four freedoms, which was sort of, in my view, the unfulfilled legacy of modern American liberalism. So, and part of the hopeful element, is some a subject that we both have an abiding interest in, which is religion. And it's been striking to me, the showing of sort of clergy and pastors in Minnesota. That recalls very vividly to me the civil rights era, which people don't adequately understand. This is another uh, problem of historical memory. The civil rights movement was basically a religious revival. That you don't get the level of um, heroic commitment on the part of ordinary people to literally put your body on the line, to tilt against this, you know, century long unjust system of racial oppression. That was not it was not going to go away by virtue of conventional interest group politics. We knew all of that. One
Or
of FDR's
arguments,
sins was
position
striking a
papers.
right,
Yeah.
right. You need moral imagination. You need a sense of a higher justice. You need all of that to galvanize people under the most adverse imaginable conditions who actually did overthrow Jim Crow, who created a second Reconstruction in this country. So, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I do think, religion is one of the things that people on the left, again, reflexively dismiss or don't understand or think they don't have to. It's regarded as an atavism. And what's happened over all this time is it has become almost, it's the largest, as you well know, evangelicals are the largest voting bloc for Trump. Um, and you have to ask yourself, yeah, you're right. This is fascism is an ideology of despair and nihilism and, lust and ultimately self-destruction, I think. And
Oh, yeah.
but how does it get harnessed to the evangelical movement, right? That is a huge question that I think needs serious unpacking. And no one on the left can be bothered. That's again to go back to the QAnon thing. Like, I think in the lead of that piece, I talked to this very good Matthew Sutton, this great historian of American evangelicalism, and he said, the first time I saw one of these QAnon, sort of fever charts of all the kind of alleged, lines of transmission in this global pedophile conspiracy, I thought to myself, I've seen this before. And it was, the sort of dispensationalist a flow chart of human history. And it was all this, it's structurally identical. And he was right. I looked it up after I interviewed him. And, that's a very deep, and I would argue like a universal human longing. People need history to make sense. And they will in the absence of anything else, they will glom onto the most improbable, bizarre, paranoid, delusional, conspiratorial nonsense. But it makes
Yeah.
sense to them. And it gives them a sense. I interviewed someone else, another student of the movement, who said, like, QAnon, it works like a religion in the sense that it gives you a sense of purpose. It gives you, like, you get up every day and you think, I'm going to go track the global pedophile conspiracy online. It gives you
Yeah.
something to do.
And it gives you community too, as
Right, a
also,
community of like-minded people, all that,
and a
Trump
larger
rallies,
vision and purpose. And,
right. Yeah.
and
And Trump,
that's, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say Trump rallies also function as religious revivals that way. You're
Yeah.
among the elects, everyone understands what the project is. You're going to ritually denounce the enemy who is satanic, all the rest of it. It's very powerful. And there's nothing on the left that comes close to it, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, there isn't. And it's that, so like the early American reactionaries, like, they were big fans of this German philosopher named Eric Vogelin.
Oh, I know Vogelin well. I've
And
read widely,
yeah,
and
and like, and he was
I
obsessed, but
actually
not just,
kind of I like his Gnosticism book.
okay.
It's
Although that, what he called Gnosticism was not
I
Gnosticism,
know,
but
I know. Yeah,
uh, but I will say, yeah, like the thing that was kind of his overarching idea was that people must have transcendence,
right,
and that they have to see themselves. They have to see the bigger picture, and that this is a innate human longing.
right.
And and I think he was right about that. Like, his
Yeah.
history was crap, and he was an authoritarian,
No,
and
no,
a bad
no.
scholar.
All true. Yeah, all true.
but
Yeah,
the larger idea that people, they want something outside of themselves, because this world is an unforgiving and cruel place,
it's
and
harsh.
so if we can
It's
have
also
something
it's
else to look forward to,
alienating and
then
atomizing. So if you can come together, like in what Martin Luther King famously called the beloved community, right? And
yeah,
the power of that moment, I think, was kind of the high water mark of certainly the moral imagination of American liberalism.
yeah,
And I do think, yeah, you're right. The early, sort of flush times of the Obama campaign recalled that. But again, the problem there, I would argue, was a structural one with the Democratic Party. Like, Obama was not going to do what FDR did. He wasn't going to found a Pecora commission to go after the bad actors in the banking industry that brought about the 2008 meltdown. He famously
no,
told the bankers when he summoned them that I'm all that stands between you and the pitchforks. Like, yeah, that was the thing. You had a sort of civil rights, veneer over the same product, which it was neoliberal finance industry centrism. Um,
yeah. Well, and I would say, though, that, I guess, on a more hopeful note, it's hard, Chris,
yeah, I
but
know. I
the like the protests that we are seeing in
Yeah,
Minnesota and the various No Kings rallies, this is kind of a recapturing of that, but ultimately, the people who will solve these problems are not in. They're the ones who are just the regular marchers right now,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
ultimately, and and
And
and and
but they
and when
are,
and to put their
yeah,
bodies on the line. Like,
yeah,
people can see the regular non-political public, as you were saying earlier.
right,
When they see just regular normal people like Alex Preddy or like Renee Good, being mercilessly killed and
yeah,
abused and gassed, um, that that has an effect in the same way that the civil rights marchers of the
right.
1960s and the anti-war
Yeah,
marchers of the
Bull Connor.
1970s did.
Yeah, I've thought of Bull Connor all throughout this.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think they are also, these are the people who are creating pressure on the Democratic Party to at long last do something. And we'll see how far that goes, and if the Democratic Party doesn't do something, we need a new Democratic Party.
I think so. All right. Well, let's see. So you got anything coming out in the next little bit for people to keep an eye out for, or anything you want to plug?
Oh God. Oh me. You know, I've been doing a bit more editing, so I haven't been writing at my usual frequency. The last thing I did was this David Brooks thing you mentioned, and I got I think I was surprised actually at the response that got, because I've been attacking David Brooks literally for decades. But yeah, apart from that, I'm just waiting for the next catastrophe. We'll see.
Okay. Well, so what social media do you want people to follow you on? How about that?
Well, I deactivated my Twitter account finally when I speaking of editing, I edited a piece about how Grok has become the world's most popular, I guess, source of pedophilic imagery, and I was just like, okay, I'm out. So yeah, I'm. What is my Blue Sky moniker? I can never remember. I guess it's just at chrislayman.bsky.com.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. And then, of course, people can always read you at The Nation as well.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio transcript of all the episodes. And if you are liking what we're doing here, we have paid and free subscription options. You can subscribe on patreon.com/discoverflux, or you can subscribe on flux.community on Substack. And if you can do a paid subscription, that would be great. I would really appreciate that. This is a hard time for media and for journalists who are not funded by oligarchs like Elon Musk or any of these other people like Jeff Bezos. So that would be great. But I'd still like to stay in touch anyway, if you can't afford that right now. And if you can forward the show to your social media or something like that. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click like and subscribe so you can get notified whenever there's a new episode. Thanks a lot.